This morning we talked about stream entry in the context of the image of entering into the stream being the Noble Eightfold Path, which then would take you directly to an experience of Nibbana. This experience is also called the arising of the Dhamma I, which is invariably expressed with the same sentence throughout the canon, which is, whatever is subject to origination is all subject to cessation. A couple of questions come from this. One, what does the statement actually say? And two, what kind of experience would validly be expressed by the statement? In other words, what kind of experience would you have where you come out of it and this would be the first thing that would hit you? And that would be true. There are a couple of misinterpretations around both issues. One is sometimes you hear it translated as whatever is subject to arising is all subject to passing away. But the Buddha actually said origination. Now origination doesn't mean just coming into being. It means something that's caused. In particular, the cause is something that comes from within the mind. So whatever is caused coming from within the mind will be subject to cessation. That's what it actually says. Because sometimes you hear it just accepting the fact that whatever arises passes away. It's an acceptance of the principle of inconstancy or anicca. And the Buddha wouldn't take this as a valid basis for making a statement like that. He'd say, you finally decide, okay, I believe, yeah, things do arise, and then they're all going to pass away. That's called agreement through pondering of views. In other words, you consider a view and it makes sense, fits in with whatever other things you've learned, and you give credence to it. There's one of the forest monks, one of the Western monks who studied in Thailand, went home to Canada one time. His brother asked him, well, all these years in Thailand, what did you learn? And the monk said, whatever arises passes away. And the brother said, duh. So why would that be an experience that would really hit you? And again, you think about the test cases of the assassins. Thinking that whatever arises passes away would not have that much of an impact on them. But again, you notice the formula when Sariputta gained the Dhamma. You're hearing that verse from Venerable Assaji. The story goes that Assaji was on his alms round. Sariputta at that time was studying with another teacher. He saw Assaji and was impressed by his comportment, the way he walked, the way he looked here, and the way he acted on his alms round. So he followed him outside of the town and asked him finally, who is your teacher? What is the Dharma he teaches? And Assaji, who was an arahant by that point, he was one of the Buddha's first 5 students to become arahants, said, I'm still new to this Dharma and discipline. I can't explain it in full to you, but I can give you the gist. And the gist was, whatever is subject to causation, its cause and its cessation. That's the teaching of the Buddha. So it's a question of seeing cause and effect. Now apparently Sariputta immediately was thinking of the cause of what? And he went down to the cause of stress and suffering. And then pursued it down to what's causing the suffering. You get to the craving. What causes the craving? You've got contact, and so on down the line. You go to the factors of dependent co-arising, and then there's some factors of dependent co-arising that go from sensory contact that actually come before sensory contact. And this is an important part of dependent co-arising that's often overlooked, that the different factors that lead to suffering have contact kind of halfway through, which means there's a lot that you're bringing to your experience that's going to determine whether you suffer or not. In other words, you can be primed to suffer no matter what you see or hear, good or bad. And it's not so much because of it being a good thing or a bad thing, but what you're primed to look for, what you're primed to expect. And so you go down, chase those things down through intention, attention, finally you get to the factor of fabrication, which is basically the way you intentionally put things together. The Buddha talks about the aggregates being put together from a potential that comes in from the past. But the actual experience of the aggregates it depends on your present moment contribution to the whole process. If you didn't have that present moment contribution, you wouldn't be experiencing anything. And so you take that apart, and again, as I said, you get to that point where you're stymied. We get to that image I mentioned this morning of the Buddha being asked by the Deva, how did you get across the stream? And the Buddha said, well, by neither pushing forward nor by staying in place. You get to the point where there is no, you realize if you try to go to some other state, it's going to be stressful. If you stay where you are, it's going to be stressful. Is there an alternative between coming, going, and staying? And at that point, if everything falls together properly, you let go. And at that moment, there is no intention, not even the intention not to have an intention. There's no fabrication. All the 6 sense spheres will fall away, and there is a vision of the deathless. And what's left is a consciousness that is outside of space and time, and it's not known through the 6 sense spheres. It's not an aggregate, because aggregates cover only things that are existing in space and time. It's not dependently co-arisen, which is why it's objectively true. For most of us, as I said, our experience has a lot of preconditions that we bring to it. And it's always a question, well, what preconditions did you bring to influence you to see things a certain way? This has none of that. It's a totally unmediated experience. It has no object, not even consciousness itself, and it is not conditioned. Now sometimes you hear that ordinary consciousness is also not conditioned. I heard one monk once say, well, how could the conditioned phenomena know other conditioned phenomena? So therefore consciousness must be unconditioned. And the Buddha's descriptions of ordinary everyday consciousness, every act of consciousness of an object is conditioned, one way or another. But this is something separate, this is something apart. The Buddha calls it consciousness without surface. The Pali term is vijnana anidasanam. And the image he gives is a beam of light. He said, suppose there's a house with a window on the east and a wall on the west. The sun rises in the east. And he asked the monks, okay, when the sun rises in the east, where the sunbeam that goes through the window, where does it land? Well, it lands on the other wall. He said, okay, what happens if you take away the wall? Where does it land? Well, it lands on the ground. What happens if you take away the ground? It lands on the water. What happens if you take away the water? Then they say it doesn't land. And that's the image of this consciousness, which is why it's called consciousness without surface. There's no place where it lands. You see light only because it's reflected off of something. Now you look up in the sky at night where it's dark, and you forget that there are light beams going through the sky all the time, but you only see the ones that are reflected off of something or shining from something. But the light beams in between, you don't see them unless there's an object. So in this case, there's no object at all, so you cannot see this light beam, which is why the consciousness of an arahant cannot be located. But it is bright in and of itself. The one drawback for that image is that light beams go in only one direction, but this has no direction at all because it is outside of space and time. And this is the only kind of experience that would validly lead to expression, whatever is subject to origination. Because you see, this is not subject to origination. It was not caused by anything in your mind. You did not contribute anything to cause this. And then you look back at what is subject to origination, you see that's all ceased at that point. So that's the experience. There's an objection sometimes that there is no such thing as a consciousness without object, or there's no unconditioned consciousness. That comes from a misreading of Majjhima 38. There's a passage which is translated in the Nyanamoli translation as, have I not stated in many ways the consciousness to be dependently arisen, since without a condition there is no origination of consciousness? Well, that's not what the Pali actually says. The Pali actually says, haven't I in many ways said of dependently co-arisen consciousness that apart from a requisite condition, there is no origination of consciousness? In other words, he said he's implying there are two types of consciousness. Consciousness that is dependently co-arisen, consciousness that is not. And this consciousness of the deathless is not. So it's a state of unlimited consciousness that's said to be luminous all around, and without end. And because it's outside of space and time, nothing can touch it. And it's not inconstant or impermanent. That was pretty quick, wasn't it? Now, the issue comes up is a lot of experiences that people say, well, this happened, because this is counted as stream entry. And the couple that I've sort of listed of what I've seen around, one is there's a state of blanking out, where you do one of the Vipassana techniques where whatever comes up, you let it go, force it, let it go, let it go, let it go, and then you go down into this state of total blanking out. And some people actually think that is an awakening. But in the forest tradition, it's said to be a state of they call non-perception. the state of non-percipient beings. These beings are mentioned in the Pali Canon, and the state of concentration that would get you there is not in one of the lists of ordinary concentration, because it is not right concentration. You blank out, you're out. And if this were what we're aiming at, the Buddha wouldn't have called it awakening. He would have called it the big sleep. Because the consciousness without service, I mean, it's really amazing. It's a state of total well-being. When you leave it, you come back and you realize even pleasant sensory contacts are painful. It's one of the first things you notice when you return to the six senses. So the blanking out state is not what we're after. I fell into this a couple times when I was meditating in Thailand. There was a time when Ajahn Fuang, my teacher, was sick, and he was staying at Wadasokaram, which was Ajahn Lee's old monastery. And I was attending to him while he was sick, but he made me fill the schedule that we're supposed to follow in the monastery, which included sometimes 1, sometimes 2, sometimes 3 sits a day. And I was getting usually about 2 hours of sleep at night because I had to look after him. He needed hot compresses, he needed all kinds of things to help look after him while he was sick. And so when I went to the group meditations, I had to listen to Dharma talks. And they had about 14 monks on a rotating roster to give Dharma talks. And out of the 14, maybe 2 could give good Dharma talks. And the rest, I just don't want to hear this. Well, I didn't say crap, but I don't want to hear this. And so I found that by focusing down and just not paying attention to anything at all, boom, I went down. And then what seemed like a few seconds later, it was 10 o'clock, which was the ending time for the meditation. With Ajahn Fuang, he'd always said that if you don't ask questions about your meditation experiences unless they've happened twice. So sure enough, the next night it happened again. So then I felt, okay, now I can talk about it. And I asked him about it, and he said, did you like it? He said, well, it was quiet, but I don't know, I came out feeling kind of drugged. He said, good, because there are people who think it's awakening. It's not. But then I found that I was stuck on it. I mean, anytime there was a horrible Dharma talk, boom, I was on. And it got to, anytime there was a Dharma talk at all, boom. And the thing about it was that you could set a time that you would come out. You wanted to come out at 10, you wanted to come out at midnight. We did an all-night sit one time. I said, I want to come out at dawn. And the next thing I knew was dawn. And this is becoming kind of habitual. There was one time, there was an Ajahn, his name is Ajahn Put, who was becoming famous at the time, and he was extremely eloquent and very articulate. And someone came to the monastery one day and got this great Dhamma talk tape of Ajahn Put. Let's listen to it. So he put the tape in the machine, and next thing, ding, it was on, it was done. He said, wasn't that a great talk? I said, I don't know, I didn't hear it. Until one day I was back at Wadasokaram, and I had the job of looking after the sound equipment, because other monks usually like to turn the volume way up. And so, your ears would ring, your whole body would be ringing with the Dhamma talk. And I would keep the volume down. So that night I got the volume adjusted. I was sitting right in front of the monk who was giving the Dharma talk, because the amplifier was right below the seat. And so even before I could get into concentration, he starts the Dhamma talk. He said, there are these people who get stuck on the state of non-perception. I was all ears. And he says, everything gets very quiet, and time passes really fast. And the problem is that when they get reborn in the state of non-percipient beings, when they stay that way for a long time, and because there's been so much pressure on their consciousness, that when they come out and they use the Thai word, bum bum bur bur, which means you're kind of bonkers, because you haven't been thinking or doing any conscious activity at all for a long time. And so that was what kind of weaned me off of this experience, for fear of getting bum bum bur bur. So that's one of the kind of experiences that's sometimes mistakenly said to be stream entry. Another one is when you have a strong sense of the oneness of all beings. You see, we're all interconnected, we're all one. The Buddha says, it is possible to have experiences of oneness, but they are fabricated. They are put together. And if you don't see that, then you're missing something important. Another experience is something they call, it's an unfortunate term for it, the psychological term is a neurotic breakthrough, where it's not that you become neurotic, but you actually have been suffering under a neurosis of some kind, something that's making you suffer quite a bit. And all of a sudden one day it just breaks, and you feel totally liberated. The present moment is wonderful. The present moment is a great place to be. And you want to hang out there as much as you can. After a while it begins to fade, and all you can think about is, I want to get that experience back. But the problem with that experience is that you don't see, well, what is it that caused the neurosis to break? There's no insight into karma. There's no insight into any of the workings of the mind. It's just something broke open, and you have this wonderful experience of everything making sense, everything being totally meaningful right here in the here and now. So those are some of the experiences that are mistakenly attributed to be stream entry. And that's my talk. So, if you have any questions, be curious to see what your questions are.
Hi, I was curious if the state of non-perception that you were describing is one of the arupa jhanas, or...
No.
Okay.
It's outside of the list.
Okay. It just sounded similar, so I wanted to check.
No, with the arupa jhanas, there is a very clear perception, like infinite space or infinite consciousness. But this has no perception at all.
Sort of, I guess, clarifying, do you think that this experience is what defines stream entry, or is it like dependent on this experience, or can it arise separately?
Okay, the stream itself is the Eightfold Path, and then the experience of the deathless would be the fruit. And then you come out of that, and after the afternoon break, if we have questions to keep us up to the break, then we'll talk about what happens as a result.
Thank you.
Aim the mic at your mouth.
Hello, can you hear me okay?
Mm-hmm.
I've had experiences during meditation where my breath is very strong, and I can feel it throughout my whole body in a way that feels really intense and sometimes overwhelming. And I think that the sensations can be really strong where they feel good, but they're also sort of frightening. And I'm not sure if it's a desirable form of concentration or not.
Okay, there's a factor in concentration that's called a rapture, called Bhikkhu. And sometimes it's very intense, and sometimes it's kind of mild. And if you're having a very intense experience, it's kind of like someone who's been on a desert and comes in and has that first glass of water. There's something in your body, something in your mind that really thirsts for this. And so when it comes up, you get really intensely feeling it. When it comes to the point where it's beginning to feel tiresome, ask yourself, is there a more subtle level of energy in the body someplace? Try to focus in on that. It's like changing the dial on a radio. You're listening to hard rock, and you say, no, I want something more calming. And just look for the more subtle energy. The other thing is, what gets kind of overwhelming about it is it feels that it's totally contained in the body, and now has nowhere to escape. Think of it escaping outside the palms of your hands, the soles of your feet. See what that does.
I have a question about dependent co-arising.
Mm-hmm.
So the third and fourth steps, the sensory consciousness and name and form, they condition each other, right?
Well, name and form comes before consciousness. Well, there's consciousness and then there's name and form. In one of the versions, they condition each other, yeah. Go ahead.
So there's two versions?
Well, there's many versions of dependent co-arising. There's one that chases it back from sensory contact to name and form, to consciousness, to fabrication, to ignorance. There's another one, sensory contact, name and form, consciousness, and then consciousness and name and form condition each other.
Okay, so in one of the versions, they simultaneously condition each other? So can you give a concrete example of how that would manifest in my experience?
Okay, you've got your consciousness of an object, and your consciousness depends on the object. But you wouldn't know that object unless you had consciousness, so that your consciousness of the object depends on consciousness. And then the object can be either something happening in the body, in terms of the four elements, or in the mind, they have what the factors are called: intention, attention, perception, feeling, contact. And the contact here would be contact among mental events. Like you pay attention to a perception.
Okay, so I think I was confused about the direction where the name and form conditions the consciousness. So is it basically the name and form has to exist for the consciousness to?
For consciousness to have an object, yeah, it has to be that one of these things has to act as the object.
Okay, thank you.
From the reading, it really feels like, from my heart, that working on virtue is like the most important thing to be ready for this.
Yeah, because you're going to have to be really honest with yourself. You know, was there a moment of total absence of fabrication? What am I actually experiencing? And virtue teaches you to be honest with yourself. I think it was a John Cha who says one of the first things you learn when you start observing your mind is how much of a liar it is.
A liar cheat.
What? Goho. In the Thai words, goho is just lies. Right.
Thank you.
Right behind you.
Thank you, Tanajan. The third comment of things that people confuse with stream entry, the narcotic break, or neurotic, not narcotic, neurotic break. Breakthrough. I heard you, I wonder if you could talk about that a little bit more, because part of what I heard you say was that people miss attuning to what were the causes and conditions that allowed that falling away to occur.
Yeah, because one of the important things you're going to learn from stream entry is that you saw precisely what your mind was doing leading up to that. And it's one of the things that all of a sudden becomes very clear. Here's an active intention, here's an active attention. You see these very clearly. And when you see that moment where you're kind of stymied and you realize, okay, at this moment there was no intention at all, you know why things broke open. Whereas with the neurotic breakthrough, it just kind of happens. There's something in the mind that says, I give up, I'm not going to carry this around anymore. Bang, it breaks. And then everything seems to open up and make sense.
For a while.
For a while, yeah.
And so perhaps if someone has had an experience like that, the invitation would be to keep paying attention, keep exploring. Yeah.
There's a passage, and unfortunately it comes in a very obscure part of the canon, where the Buddha gives one of these lists of 10 things, and there are 10 unrelated things. And one of them is, what is it that nourishes the Dhamma? Important question. It's kind of buried. It's basically two things: commitment and reflection.
Yes.
You commit to doing it, and then you reflect on the results, reflect on what you did. And then you try to say, well, what's lacking? Let's go back. And it's this reflective quality that's going to make all the difference. And this is why when the Buddha taught Rahula from the very beginning, one of the images he gave us, the Dhamma practice is like a mirror. You look in your actions as you would look at a mirror.
Thank you, Bhante. And would you say akin to that is continuing to observe, is that forward leading?
Right.
Okay. Thank you very much.
My question is a little nerdy, but I've thought about it a lot. What is the difference between an arahant and a Buddha? And is the fruit of stream entry a negation of the defilements, which includes delusion, Or is it a positive knowledge, like the Dharma eye?
It's a positive knowledge. You actually see something you didn't see before. And it's one of the reasons why there's no pride around this experience is because you just realize how stupid you were. You said it's something I should have seen a long time ago. It's almost like you willed yourself to be ignorant. As for the difference between a Buddha and an Arahant, their purity is the same. But the Buddha's comprehension of the Dharma, his ability to teach the Dharma, and of course his ability to find the Dharma to begin with, that's special. There's a hand behind you.
Hi, Ajahn. So my question, I was curious about the difference between feeling nimitta and a light nimitta, and what the difference between jhana based on either of those would be like.
Okay, the light nimitta is when you actually see light in your mind. And the feeling nimitta is when the mind settles down, there will be different feelings in the body that correspond to the fact when now my mind has settled down. And there are also hearing nimittas, where a certain sound will come as the mind is settling down. Now for the light nimitta, it's very tempting to forget about your breath and to focus on the light. And the Buddha actually has some instructions on how you do that for a while. You can use that as a way of kind of fine-tuning your awareness, fine-tuning your active attention. But there comes a point where he has you go back to doing the practice of the jhanas based on your experience of the body. This is where it all comes down to.
So would it be a different experience if the jhana was based on the light nimitta versus the feeling nimitta, or similar?
Well, they don't, the light nimitta, they actually give a different series of names for these states before you back up to do the jhanas and with the classical factors. There's one that's, I think it's the experience of light, the experience of forms, the experience of the beautiful. And then you go to the formless jhanas. And he talks to Anuruddha, who was the monk of his students who was most skilled at seeing levels of devas, what was going on, that kind of thing. And so he takes him through how he had that experience himself, and then went back to the jhanas.
I guess kind of piggybacking on my earlier question, just about sequencing things. And I don't know, I know you've done you have a lot of writings. And I wonder, do you have like a protocol, basically, like in terms of like how, to kind of prime oneself for stream entry, for example, like how would you sequence a meditation practice or a complete Eightfold Path practice? Is there something to that?
Well, start out with virtue. You start out with right view, but you perfect your virtue first, as best you can. As I said, that makes you honest, because you're going to be, who can you go to ask, is this really stream entry or not? The best teachers will say you have to depend on your own honesty. So your virtue is going to be really important. And then work on concentration. And a lot of people are in a hurry, their mind gets settled down and say, okay, what's next? And think about Ajahn Mahabua with studying with Ajahn Mun. Ajahn Mahabua was stuck on concentration for 8 years, and Ajahn Mun left him there until he saw there was time for him to move on. Because you want to get a really solid foundation. Ajahn Fuang used to say there are two types of meditators in the world: those who don't think enough and those who think too much. Nobody starts out just right. And you have to notice which kind of meditator you are. Those who don't think enough tend to get the mind quiet really, really quickly. But because they're not challenged in getting the mind to be quiet, on the days when they can't get the mind quiet, they don't know what to do. Whereas people who have trouble getting the mind quiet, their problem is they get discouraged early on. They think, I'm just not cut out for this, it's not going to work. But if they keep at it, eventually they begin to see all the ins and outs of the mind, what they have to do. If I have this problem, I solve it this way. I have that problem, I solve it that way. And so if you can stick with it long enough, so in cases like that, Like I was the type who thought too much, so John Punke kept saying, it's concentration, 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 work on this.
And so that kind of creates a foundation for the next step. And
Right. And because the more quiet you can get your mind, the more clearly you're going to be able to see when there is movement. It's like trying to listen to a sound far away, but you've got your stereo blaring inside the house. So you got to turn that off, and then then there's the refrigerator, turn that off. Then there's the air filter, turn that off, And then finally you can start hearing the subtle things far away.
and all these other kind of like lifestyle choices that we make, maybe in the Eightfold Path, support that kind of quieting of the mind because
Yeah.
you're less distracted.
There's less distracted, and there's less cause for regret around your daily actions. You sit down and think, oh, I lied. Ooh. And either you feel bad about it or you tell yourself not to feel bad about it, in which case it's like having a wound or else having lots of scar tissue over the wound. Neither's good. You want to have no wounds to begin with. And this has to do with your speech, has to do with your actions, has to do with the way you pursue your livelihood. And that creates the context.
Thank you.
ท่านอาจารย์นะครับ The first question, what is the Pali term of the non-perception? Is that the neva sanya,
No, it's an asanyi bhava.
asanyi bhava? And is that what either one of the two teachers before Prince Siddhartha became the Buddha?
No.
No.
It's something else.
Totally different. Oh, okay. And the second question, I vaguely remember there's a sutta about if someone grasping Dhamma wrong is as if grasping a snake, and then the snake like bite himself, alakatu. So for today, I'm afraid. We learn about stream entry and stuff. What would be a good way to take the study today and grasping it correctly so it's not biting myself?
Okay. You want to keep asking yourself, what am I contributing to my experience right now? What is the intentional element that I'm bringing? And that falls back to the Four Noble Truths. What am I doing that's adding to the stress? That's the question you ask.
And is there an example of the question that should not be asked at all after today?
There are lots.
Oh, it depends. I'm sorry.
There are lots of questions you don't ask.
Oh, okay. Thank you. I'll end here.
Hi, thank you. Since there's nobody in the States that has stream entry, and we're talking about it, and I don't think I'm going to get there, and I'm not actually trying to, but the background of it all, the looking at my actions, looking at who I am in the world, is for me the purpose. So I have some issues with impatience and reactivity, and I sometimes just can't help myself from, especially if it's a good friend, not just in general, more it's in very intimate relationships, that I can blurt things out about my uncomfortableness in that situation. But and I'm looking, when you're talking about it, I'm looking at like what the feeling I'll sit with while I'm getting impatient, kind of like I'm uncomfortable and I don't want to say anything. And then if somebody's being really negative about things, I have this problem with negativity. And I just kind of yesterday blurted out at a very good friend of mine that I couldn't take it. I couldn't take her drama. I couldn't take her negativity. And it wasn't the first time. And right now I'm very untethered from some deaths that happened recently. So I find myself doing things that are issues of mine that are coming up more. And
This is when the Buddha's example, or his recommendation would be, you've got to make your mind like earth. In other words, one of the questions you might want to ask you is, okay, when people are saying things or doing things like this, do I feel that my sense of being in control is being threatened? And if so, how can I let go of that fear? That, people are doing things that I don't like. Do I feel like I'm being stepped on? Do they feel like they're treating me like a doormat? Is that one of the issues? And then the Buddha has you think about your goodwill for everybody being big like the earth. And the things that other people are doing, he compares to a man coming along and he wants to make the whole earth be without earth. So he starts digging here and spitting there and urinating here. And it looked kind of pitiful, right? It's going to take him a long time to get through all the earth. So if you can think of yourself as being big like the earth and not being threatened by the things that come at you, just hold that perception in mind.
Okay.
Because it's, again, the Buddha says, look at the fabrications you're bringing to the present moment. And it has to do with the way you breathe, it's bodily fabrication. The way you talk to yourself, verbal fabrication. And then what he calls mental fabrication, which are perceptions and feelings. And do I have a perception of myself being tender and wounded, and so I can't stand anything? Or can I change that perception to ask myself, well, which parts of me are not wounded right now? Focus on those. And that way you perceive yourself as much bigger and much less threatened by things like this, and it's not as oppressive. The other thing that's oppressive is you think about how many times this is my friend playing this drama queen with me. And she's doing it right now. And the time she did in the past, that's gone. The time she's going to do in the future, that hasn't come yet. That what she's doing right now, I can take it. Tell yourself that.
Wonderful.
ท่านอาจารย์ earlier in the morning you had given an example of how to look at the present moment in terms of 5 aggregates. I would love to get a couple more examples if you can, because I remember that 5 aggregates was one of the kammatthana that the Buddha gave some people, and the way you explain it in the moment is something that I haven't thought of or haven't heard before. So if you have a chance, I would love to hear more elaboration on that.
Okay, well, the 5 aggregates, there's always the question, why are there 5? Why do we have 7, 6? And because you can divide the activities of the mind into many, many different categories. Why did the Buddha choose these specific categories? And the closest I can think of, because he says these are the aggregates for clinging. And the clinging aggregates, the word for clinging means to feed. So think about looking for food. Okay, you've got form, which is your body, and you've got the form of whatever that food is out there. That's the physical form. Then you've got feeling. You've got the feeling of hunger, because you lack the hunger. And then there's the feeling of fullness that you're trying to create. Perception is when you identify something as being edible or not edible. What do kids do when they're crawling across the floor as babies, and they come across something? Where does it go?
In the mouth.
Right there. Is this food? That's kind of our basic question. In fact, that's how the Buddha says we define ourselves as beings, is by what we feed on. And so you perceive it, okay, this is food. Then the next question is, can I eat it raw or do I have to cook it? Like if you have potato, don't eat a potato raw. But you can cook it and eat it. And that cooking would be fabrication, sankhara, sankhan. And then vijnana, consciousness, would be your knowledge of these things. So just look at the way you feed, and that all the aggregates are right there.
ขอบคุณค่ะ
Yeah. So my question is a follow-up on while we are trying to perfect our virtue, we are going to act out of greed, hatred, and delusion. So you said if we sit with that, it's like being in a wounded state. So how do we work with it? So.
Well, you just remind yourself you have certain rules that you've laid down for yourself, and you're not going to let your greed, anger, and delusion force you to break your promise to yourself, which is to observe the precepts. And you see it as a promise you made to yourself. Now, some of us find it hard to break promises we make to other people, but easy to break promises we make to ourselves, which is all backwards. Tell yourself, okay, I've made this promise, and I know that there's a reason for that promise I made. And then try to remember something. Okay, this precept is more important than my greed. It's more important than my anger. More important than my delusion. And that's one of the ways in which you're putting up a fence, and you're not ending the problem, but at least you're putting some limits on your greed, aversion, and delusion.
Yeah, given all that, let's, if in case we break it while trying to not break it the next time, how does one repent or? Yeah,
well, the Buddha says you reflect on the fact, okay, I made a mistake. I recognize that it was a mistake, but if I have remorse over it, it's not going to help. But if I do determine not to repeat the mistake, that's the best thing to be done. And then lots of goodwill for yourself, goodwill for the person you harmed, goodwill for everybody.
Thank you.
Zoomland.
Me again.
Wait a minute, there's somebody back there. Go ahead.
I have two questions. First of all, the first one, just to not answer, but try to think, reflect her question about angry or angry or anger or depression or something. I mean, I'm as a mom, right? So not somebody else, but my own children, that I have a problem too, right? I mean, I'm with a teenager, I have to try to have patience and go through this along 2-3 years, listening to Dhamma and everything. What my take, one thing is about jit, about mind, that mind is not, it's still not, that doesn't stay still, right? It doesn't stay. Everything change, mind change too. So ไม่มีอะไรเที่ยง so it's the same thing. Like at that time, I try to think my kids at that time, their mind, they don't even know that themselves. Sometimes my mind is not still either. So because it change all the time, they are not intention to do it, but sometimes they have defilement, I would call defilement at that time, right? To make them be that way. But I'm sure later on, sometime they look back and they regret what they do. So the same thing as me. At that time, sometimes I upset and I might yell out of whatever anger or whatever. Then I come back, look back later on, I'm like, oh, at that time, I was not happy about myself. I reflect to that and I try to get better. So I think that's how I try to look at that way.
We have to look at everybody as Thai. Put your heart in their heart. Put their heart in your heart.
Yes. Yeah.
To realize, okay, you know, did you obey your parents all the time?
Do I what?
Did you obey your parents all the time?
Not all the time, but a lot of time.
Well, I should go back and ask your parents.
Yeah. As a Thai children, a Thai daughter.
I have a monk at the monastery whose father has never really accepted the fact that he ordained as a monk. And so one time I asked him, did your father follow the career path that his father wanted him to? No. And how about your grandfather? Did he follow the career path his father wanted him to? No. It's a family tradition.
Yes, so I think that, just like you said, put ourselves in their mind, and because mind change all the time too. I mean, people, if they can, they want to do good, but sometimes at that condition, they might not.
I mean, teenagers is a hard time to be, hard life.
Yes.
Because you learn certain rules when you're a child.
Yeah.
And then you have to figure out as you grow up which of those rules still apply and which ones don't apply anymore. And you learn that through trial and error.
Yes.
It's like when you cross the street, when you're a little child, hold on to mommy's hand, look left and look right. Look left and right in America, and then you cross.
Yes.
Now, some of the things that you learn as a child are like hold on to mommy's hand. You're not going to have to do that anymore.
Yeah.
Other things are like look left, look right. You still have to do that. And it takes kids a while to figure out which is which.
Yes.
So have some compassion.
Yeah. That's so.
Okay,
That's
zoom
why.
in.
Yeah.
Okay, lots of questions here. So one question is, why do we need to recognize if we are stream enterers at all or not? Because there is a question on whether this will encourage our selfing and conceit. Don't we still want to keep practicing toward liberation wherever we are on the path? It doesn't seem to be a reason to let up.
Okay, well, there's no reason to let up. And the Buddha does say this is one of the problems for stream enterers is they get heedless. They figure, hey, only 7 more lives, that's not bad.
Okay. There's one question on...
I mean, one of the reasons I'm talking this is about this topic is there are a lot of certified stream enterers out there who do get heedless.
I don't want to ask questions on that one. My own questions. Okay, so there's one question which says, is there any time period or time lag between the path of practice to stream entry and the actual realization, that is the
There are
phala?
passages in the canon that say that there is some no time lag.
And the question here is specifically, is it short, long, or something like that?
Well, it's basically that sometime before you die, you will get the fruit of stream entry. But how that works, I don't know.
I see. Okay. There's one that says, none of this. No, not related. Okay, something about someone who is supposedly a Western teacher who is a stream enterer or someone. Somebody is asking if that's... No, I don't think that needs to be answered. Sorry. I'm sorry. I'm making that decision.
Yeah, no, I'm not in a position to certify or decertify anybody.
Okay. Do you have any suggestions for meditators who experience self-doubt around the practice? The delusion, their mind isn't capable of attaining stream entry.
Okay, that's one of the worst things you can do to yourself is to think that you're incapable. The two things that Thayajan's warned against, one is overestimation and the other is, basically saying, I can't do this. You think about them, they came from a part of Thailand that was looked down on by other parts of Thailand. They came from a social class that was looked down on by other social classes. And their only way of having a chance in this practice was to say, look, whether people look down on me or not, I'm a human being, this is something human beings can do. You see these Dharma talks by Ajahn Mun saying, look, you all have the requisite conditions.
So, Ajahn, there is one question. This might be to address a very common question in the Theravada outside of the Thai forest tradition. Does the direct experience of Nibbana in the Thai forest tradition differ from that of Theravada Abhidhamma-based practices, for example, as in the Visuddhimagga?
Okay, I don't know about what they say in the Visuddhimagga on this topic. But I do know that there are some schools that will take that blanking out state and they'll say that that's Nibbana, because they say it's cessation. But again, it's not awakening, it's blanking out.
This one question is about the precepts with regard to stream entry. Do you have suggestions for managing cases where the precepts conflict and how to prioritize them?
What do you mean, how do they conflict? Of the various precepts, the one the Buddha treated most seriously was the precept against lying.
This question has come 3 times already, so I'm going to ask it, even though it sounds similar to related to the topic. It doesn't seem to be, but maybe I'm wrong. Does the belief in God prevent someone from attaining stream entry?
It depends on your relationship to this belief. I mean, there are gods in Theravada Buddhism. We had a Catholic priest staying with us for a while at the monastery, and he wanted to know if there were any suttas that mentioned God at all, and I was kind of embarrassed, because in the two main ones where the great Brahma appears, he doesn't come off very well. My favorite one is the one where there's this monk who gets this vision of some devas, and he asks him, do you know where the physical universe ends? And the devas say, we don't know, but there's a level of devas above us. Maybe they know. So he meditates some more and gets to the level above. You can see where this is going, right? And they say, well, we don't know, but there's another level above us. So he goes up the deva bureaucracy, and finally gets to one group of devas, and they say, well, we don't know, but there is the great Brahma. And if you're lucky, he will appear in a flash of light, and then you can ask him. And so the monk meditates, and sure enough, flash of light, there's the great Brahma. So he goes up, and he says, okay, do you know where the physical universe ends? And the great Brahma says, I'm the great Brahma, knower of all, seer of all, father of all that has been and will be. Now, if this were the book of Job, the monk would say, oh, I understand. But this is a Pali Canon. The monk said, I didn't ask you whether you were the great Brahma, knower of all, seer of all. I want to know where the physical universe ends. The great Brahma says, I am the great Brahma, knower of all, seer of all. And this goes on for 3 times. And finally, the great Brahma pulls him aside, and he says, look, I don't know. But I have this adoring retinue that believe that I know everything, and it would be very embarrassing if they saw me say, I don't know. And you go back down and ask the Buddha. And so he goes down and asks the Buddha, and the Buddha says, that was the wrong question. And the right question is not where the physical universe ends, but where it has no footing in the mind. And then he says it's consciousness without surface. One of the 2 or 3 places in the canon where this term appears. So I said, the great Brahma does not come off very well in this particular sutta. So, I mean, as long as you recognize that there are beings up there, that's perfectly fine. But from a Buddhist standpoint, you don't worship them. Spread goodwill. Be a good neighbor. In other words, that's enough.
So, because you just touched on consciousness without surface, there's a question which is pertinent to that. What's the difference between consciousness without surface and the sphere of infinite consciousness?
The sphere of infinite consciousness has consciousness as its object, and it's a conditioned state. Whereas consciousness without surface does not have an object at all, and it's not conditioned.
This is a good question. Is arising...
You're not supposed to make that comment.
Sorry. Is the arising of the Dhamma I also impermanent, like any conditioned state, hence requires ongoing cultivation?
Well, again, it's like seeing that there's water at the bottom of the well. And then you go away from the well, you're not going to see it, but you know, wherever you go, you know there's water in the well. And it rearranges your sense of what's real and what's possible. I had a conversation one time with a Buddhist scholar who said he understood that, with awakening you become equanimous to all things. But the idea that the Buddha would end all, he would experience the unconditioned, just didn't make any sense, because he said, because we are conditioned beings, how can we contact the unconditioned? And I told him his approach was the opposite of what the Buddha's approach was. The Buddha's approach said, don't start with what you think you are. Just see what you can as you develop your mind, what you can come to know. Because however you define yourself, you're going to place a limit on yourself. And so as the Buddha's, we pursued, okay, what happens if I do this, and he found the unconditioned. And realized, this is something human beings can do, and it's something that really is unconditioned. I can guarantee that. Through his own honesty.
Regarding the practice, would you recommend cultivating samadhi and looking at this, that conditionality until fabrications become less and less until there's a space of no intention or fabrication?
Okay, what you've got to do, you've got to get to the point where you begin to develop some disenchantment. You've got to get good at the concentration, get good at the concentration, and then develop some disenchantment for it. Realizing that this too is fabricated, and you want to find something that's more subtle. And what will often happen is you go from one level of concentration to another, more subtle level. But there comes a point where instead of going to another fabricated state, this third possibility opens.
There is this question on the non-percipient state that you described. Is it the same or different from what you also translate as the cessation of feeling and perception?
Cessation of
feeling and perception, or perception and feeling?
It's different from this cessation of feeling perception.
Okay, do you want to explain?
Well, it's just that you come out of the cessation of feeling and perception, and it is possible to gain discernment. Whereas with this other state, you're just so blanked out. Basically, your mindfulness is stopped for a while.
Thank you, Tanajan. I don't think any other questions are relevant.
Can you elaborate on the difference between consciousness without surface and non-dual consciousness?
Non-dual consciousness, again, that would be the consciousness of the infinitude of consciousness. It has consciousness as its object. Because that's one of the things that it's a very tempting conclusion to come to when you get to that state, because you feel that you've gotten to this level of consciousness that everything seems to come out of and everything returns to. And it doesn't seem to be sullied by anything, any of your defilements.
Yeah. Now, so is the consciousness, the non-dual consciousness, as you translate in Agutta Nikaya 1029, the same as the sphere of infinite consciousness?
I think so, yes.
Okay.
Because it is, once you get thinking that this consciousness is the ground of being, and you think, well, I've gotten as far as I can go, and it doesn't get defiled by greed or aversion and delusion. These things come and appear, and then they just disappear and don't leave a trace. And some people get into this state and they think, well, in that case, I can just do whatever I want, and it's not going to harm this consciousness. Which is why some people who have this non-dual consciousness can break the precepts.
Tanajan, I have a question of my own. Regarding the five aggregates, regarding the models of five aggregates versus the senses, the sixth sense, it seems like the Buddha has used two alternative models: the clinging aggregates, which you mentioned, and then the six senses. So, and in the fire sermon, for example, he gives the six senses, but it seems like he's listing at the same time also the aggregates. The form of the eye is there, but it's also the consciousness of the eye is included, the feeling of the eye is included. So are we to kind of look at all the aggregates in terms of what activities we are doing through our senses and our body in that sense, and the feelings we have?
Buddha starts out with form, and the form, based on that, he talks about the six senses, and then what happens as you process the six sense, when the information coming through the six senses, and your aggregates are basically the processing part. So you can see them as interconnected that way. However, I see it more as the Buddha was really good at giving different ways into the Dharma. I have a friend who passed away recently, and she was an engineer. And she said when she went to engineering school, she had a teacher who taught the calculus in 6 different ways. Because apparently I don't know calculus that well, but apparently there's 6 different ways you can get into calculus. And some find one way more intuitive than another. And so she would teach all 6. And that way she had everybody in the class passed. So I think the Buddha was that kind of teacher.
Are there any other models that I'm missing? Like these are the two I could see.
You've got the six elements or six properties.
Right. Okay.
You've got dependent core arising.
Hmm.
You've got the model of the 3 fabrications as opposed to the 5 aggregates.
Okay. Now that's the part. Are the 5 aggregates contained in the 3 fabrications, or are they?
No, you're lacking consciousness. You've got all the other aggregates except consciousness.
Uh-huh. So they are just different models for the same thing. Okay. Thank you.
Oh, there, hands back here. Go get the floating mic to float.
Tanajan, earlier you mentioned that coming out of stream entry, one could sense the pain in pleasure. And for those of us who are not stream entrants, is there a way we can hone our discernment to detect the pain in pleasure, or is that out of reach for us?
Well, you get a little taste of it when you've got the mind in concentration. And then you have to come out of concentration, so I've got to deal with this and this.
Maybe to ground it in a more prosaic example, let's say I like eating pastries a lot, and I want to reduce my attachment and clinging to pastries. As I'm eating the pastries, is there something I can do to try to discern the pain within the enjoyment of the pastry, or?
Well, what I would advise is try to do totally without sugar for a month. And then eat sugar and you say, this is disgusting. You have to get away from it long enough to sort of get it flushed out of your system. And then you realize, yeah, this is really it. How can people eat this? You know?
Is this a perception that you create for yourself, that is a perception of disgustingness as you're eating this, or?
At that point, you don't have to create the perception. It's
I see. It's natural.
It's natural.
Okay. I will give that a try. Thank you.
The only other thing I can think of is, years back, I had a case of the flu where I lost my sense of smell. And then gradually it started coming back again, bit by bit. And fortunately or unfortunately, the first smell sensors that started coming back were the ones that smelled foul odors. So coffee, Coca-Cola, perfume. Perfume was the worst. All these horrible smells that get covered up because you can smell these other nicer smells. But when they're naked like that, you realize this stuff is horrible. And for a long time I couldn't drink coffee.
And is this a general principle that can be applied to all sense pleasures, to abstain from them for a while and then to return to them?
Well, it certainly works with sugar.
Okay.
There are sense pleasures. Boy, did I miss this.
Okay, thank you.
When I was in Thailand, I wasn't thinking about not having mustard as being anything particularly, striking. But I came back to the States and my father took me to a Big Mac. No, it wasn't Big Mac, it was Burger King. And as soon as the first taste of mustard on my tongue hit me, it was like every little cell in my body said, yay! So it works only with certain sense pleasures.
Thank you.
Dear Ajahn, could you please...
Okay. Point it at your mouth,
Dear Ajahn, could you please mention again that model of 3 fabrication you mentioned?
The 3 fabrications come in dependent co-arising. It's bodily fabrication, which is the breath. Verbal fabrication, which is directed thought and evaluation, how you talk to yourself. And then mental fabrication, which are perceptions and feelings. Now, that's how they're directly experienced in the present moment in meditation. They're also, the same terms are also used to describe any physical karma, any verbal karma, any mental karma. And so basically when you're meditating, you see, okay, this is the point where physical karma begins with the breath. Verbal karma begins with thinking to yourself how you're going to say something. And then mental karma begins with your perceptions and feelings. Okay, okay, it's time for a break, and then we can continue. Come back in about half an hour.
Half an hour?
Yep. Okay, just now we talked about the experience of stream entry. And now I'd like to talk about the results. Do I have to do a sound check again?
Make sure the recording's running.
Okay, okay. You ready? Okay. Okay, basically there are 3 fetters that are cut. And again, it's having had the experience of the deathless, that's what cuts the fetters. You can't just cut them ahead of time yourself. You can try to weaken them, but the actual cutting comes from the experience of the deathless. It has a really strong impact on the mind. The first thing is your doubt about the Buddha's awakening is gone, because you've seen the truths of what he taught about there being a deathless element that the mind can contact. The fact of rebirth and the fact of karma. You see rebirth in the sense of, as you step outside of space and time, you realize that your experience of time did not begin, 1944? 1943? 1949? Whatever. It goes way, way back. It's kind of like going to a black hole. The time and space start getting distorted as you get closer and closer to the event horizon. And as you step outside space and time, you realize, okay, time has been going on for a long time, and you've been part of that experience of time. You may not see the details of previous lifetimes, but that doesn't matter. You see the fact that this has been a long process that's been going on. And you're beginning to realize that it was through your actions that you kept it going. Because you see that as your intentional input into the present moment ends, the present moment ends. So it was your intentional action that actually did the final shaping and putting together of the present moment. So you basically see these 3 things, and they're confirmed for you. That you see that there is a deathless element, rebirth is going on for a long time, and it's your actions, your intentional actions, got you to the point of stream entry, but also it's been what's keeping, your unskillful actions have been what's keeping the whole process going on for a long time. That's the first fetter that's cut. I do want to talk a little bit about that. Sometimes you hear people saying that belief in rebirth is actually not Buddhist. That's a later addition to the teachings. There is a passage where the Buddha discourages questions of what you were and what you will be. But again, he's discouraging the specifics of, what was I in my previous lifetime? What will I be in my next lifetime? He says basically the important thing is looking at your actions now. And that will take care of your experience of the space and time now and on into the future. The second argument is that there is a part of the canon, the Attagavagga, which is considered to be one of the older parts of the canon, and that it doesn't make any reference to rebirth or karma. The problem with this argument, the Attagavagga is said to be older than the others because it is quoted a couple of times in other suttas. So obviously it came before them. The problem with this argument is there's another part of the Sutta Nibbata, which is called the Parayana Vagga, which is also has a claim to be an older part because it too is quoted. In fact, it's quoted more often than the Attagavagga by other suttas, and it's actually quoted more specifically and named. But it does mention rebirth and that the goal is to end rebirth. So it's one of the Buddha's original teachings. And basically, the Buddha knew that he could not prove rebirth to people, or even the results of karma over the long term to people. But he does say it's a useful belief to hold. He treats it like a working hypothesis. And he says it's a good hypothesis to hold on to because you will tend to behave more carefully. And some people say, well, I feel insulted that I can't expect to be careful in my behavior unless I believe in punishment after death. But the Buddha's asking you instead to be more responsible, thinking about you don't know how far the consequences of your actions are going to go. But that is part of the calculation when you do anything. You think, is it worth the effort that goes into it? And if you see it's going to have long-term consequences, you want to be really careful, both for your own sake and for the sake of others. And secondly, what you might call pragmatic test is, if you believe that there is such a thing as the deathless that can be attained through human effort, you're leaving open a possibility that you would close if you said that there is no such thing. And since you don't know yet either way, leave the possibility open. That's all the Buddha's asking you for. Some people say we can believe in our innate goodness that we'll behave well. Well, you have to ask yourself, where did you get your standards for innate goodness, and how strong is your innate goodness when it gets challenged? If you believe that the actions will have long-term consequences, you'll be more likely to want to be careful in what you do. You put a little bit more effort into it. Years back, was talking about this here in this very hall. And then the following year, one of the people who were in the group came up to me afterwards and said, I heard you talk about that. I didn't particularly care for what you had to say. What I had said was, there are so many of these groups that say, suppose you have 1 year left to live. How would you live your life? And the groups get together once a week, once every other week, and talk about what changes they're making in their lives. I said, how about having a group that gets together and says, what if you really took rebirth seriously? What would that do to your lives? And so the guy said, I really didn't like what you said. And so I questioned myself as to why. And I realized I'd have to become a better person. The whole point. So just a few asides on karma and rebirth. The second thing the second fetter that gets cut it's called grasping at habits and practices. It's sila bhatta paramasa. Sometimes this is translated as grasping at rites and rituals. And some people say, well, I'm past that one. I don't have any rites and rituals in my life. But the Buddha's talking about something that goes deeper, which is you have certain ways of behaving, certain habits you've developed, certain practices that you follow, consciously or unconsciously. And the question is, why do you hold to these things? Are they really effective or are they not? Or you just have picked them up for some reason that you haven't examined carefully? Because the Buddha says someone who is virtuous, someone who's been a stream enter, has seen that the reason that their experience of stream enter was delayed was because of their own foolish actions, their own unskillful actions. So they would not want to act in a skillful way ever again, intentionally. But as I said earlier, their virtues are pleasing to the noble ones, or appealing to the noble ones, in the sense that although they are virtuous, they don't build up any pride or conceit around their virtue. They realize, I'm doing this because I have to, because I need it, not because it makes me a better person. Years back when I was first grade, my mother was the president of PTA, and the first grade teacher was also the principal of the school. It was one of those little, I grew up on a farm. I've got a story about that in a minute. And the principal would stop by every now and then to talk to my mother. And one day, my mother, after their confab, came to the dinner table and said, you wouldn't believe what that other Mrs. DeGraff said. She said she's Catholic, and what good of it, if being Catholic doesn't make you better than other people, what good is it? And even as a first grader, I guess that's stupid. Now that may have been because I was raised as a rabid Protestant, but about growing up on a farm. It was eastern end of Long Island, up on the North Fork. And I don't know if you know about Long Island, but it looks like a crocodile. There's the South Fork where you have the Hamptons and all the rich people live, and the North Fork where you have the farms. And I was giving a talk at New York Insight one time, and they introduced me as a native New Yorker, just from down the island, and having grown up in Laurel, which is a little tiny town that if you blink, you're going to miss it. And after the talk, this woman came up, and her family had a vacation home in Cutchogue, which is just a few miles down the road. She said, I think it's just so fascinating that a little farm boy would end up in Thailand. And my first instinct was, why do you look down on farm boys? Aren't we people? So that's an aside. Okay. So the grasping at habits and practices, which basically means either that you feel that by following a certain set of rules you will become a better person than other people, or that you will be, if you're a good little boy, a good little girl, they will let you into heaven. Or the other one, which is that you built up a sense of pride around your precepts. And those two aspects of grasping at habits and practices are gone for a stream enterer. The final one is you abandon self-identity views. Now, self-identity views are any way in which you identify yourself either as equal to one of the aggregates or any of the aggregates, as the owner of any of the aggregates, as being in any of the aggregates, or having the aggregates in you. For example, you would say that if you say that I am my body or I am my consciousness, that would be a self-identity view. If you say I am the owner of my consciousness, I'm the owner of my body, that's self-identity view. If you say that I exist in my body, like the little person inside that goes out and looks out the eyes, listens out the ears, that would be a self-identity view. If you say I am my infinite consciousness, which embraces all things, that's the self-identity view. Any way in which you identify yourself as being something related to the aggregates is a self-identity view. Sometimes it's said that when you reach stream entry, it's when you see that there is no self. And the question comes up, two questions come up. One is, how would you see that there is no self? There is a possibility that you'd have a self that you're not conscious of, but how would you see that fact? There are these non-percipient beings. Many people say, well, when they totally blank out, there's nothing there. Because there's nothing there, there is no self. That's a false conclusion. Because as I said earlier, there are these non-percipient beings who just kind of blank out for a long period of time, and then they come back. And they still count as beings because they still have attachments. Secondly, if you saw that if stream entry was the point where you saw that there was no self, think back, when was the first time the Buddha taught the not-self teaching? Who did he teach it to? He taught it to a group of stream enterers. Now, if they had already seen there was no self, there would have been no need for him to teach not-self. The reason he did have to teach it was not-self is because they say that even though your sense of self as being equal to the aggregates, or in the aggregates, or possessing the aggregates, or outside of the aggregates, containing the aggregates, that's gone. Still, there is a lingering sense of self hanging around the aggregates. And the image they give is of having washed a cloth, but the smell of the detergent is still in the cloth. It still kind of lingers around. And it's only when that last lingering sense of self, in other words, the sense that I am this, is gone, but there's still a lingering sense I am, without it being anchored to anything. That still lingers. That's what the Buddha had to get rid of for his first group of disciples. And this is eradicated only at arahantship. And this goes back to the point I've made several times, is when the Buddha taught about anatta. Anatta doesn't mean no self, it means not self. And it's an adjective. Form is not self. Feeling is not self. The whole purpose of this teaching is not to answer the question of whether there is or is not a self, because the Buddha said that question is not valid. It should be avoided. But what you do want to see, is this thing worth clinging to? The usual argument is it inconstant? Is it constant or inconstant? What's inconstant? If something is inconstant, you're trying to use it as your basis for happiness. Is it going to be stressful or easeful? It's going to be stressful. Which is one of the reasons, by the way, that I translate it as inconstant rather than impermanent. We know the mountains over here in Santa Cruz are impermanent. And every now and then they shake up a little bit. But not so much that people don't continue to build houses on them. But if they're constantly shifting all the time, you would want to build your house there. And the point the Buddha is making is things are shifting all the time. They're unreliable. Because they're unreliable, they're stressful. Because they're stressful and unreliable, is it worth it? In other words, this is a value judgment. Are these things worth holding on to? Again, he doesn't ask the metaphysical question of the existence or non-existence of the self. It's more a question of values. Is this worth it? And for a good part of the path, as we're getting our act together, there are certain senses of self that are worth holding on to. That's the sense that you are capable of doing this. 2, that you are responsible enough to do this. You're taking responsibility. 3, you will enjoy the results. And then 4, there's a part of you who can reflect on what you're doing and improve your behavior. The self is the inside commentator. This is the self that the Buddha was teaching to his son, Rahula, at the very beginning when Rahula was 7 years old. And before you act, ask yourself, this action that I want to do, what will be the results? And notice he says, this action I want to do. There's still a sense of I. I've heard some people say that if you have any sense that you were doing the path, it's wrong view and it's going to abort the path. Go tell that to the Buddha. He recommends, okay, I am responsible for this action, so I better look at what I expect the consequences are going to be. And then if you see that it's going to be any harm, you don't do it. If you don't see any harm, you foresee any harm, you go ahead and do it. While you're doing it, you check the results that you're actually getting. And if you see that this action, again, this action that I am doing is causing harm, you stop. If you don't see any harm, you continue. Then afterwards, if you reflect on the long term, you realize, okay, it actually did cause harm even though you didn't expect it would. Then you resolve, I'm not going to repeat that mistake, and you go talk it over with someone else who's more advanced on the path, so they can give you their advice. If you don't see that you caused any harm, then you just take joy in the fact that your practice is progressing and keep on training. So that's yourself as an internal commentator. We hear so much, but I don't want my inner critic, I want to shut up my inner critic, my inner critic is making me miserable. Your problem is not that you have an inner critic, but your inner critic is not skillful. You've got to train your inner critic to be helpful. So basically, if it says things that you're incompetent, you can't do anything at all right, say, that's not helpful. I'm not going to listen to anything that you say that's not helpful. And then after a while, the inner critic will start behaving, because they'll see that you're actually getting along better. I have a student who had a tendency, she would get into very strong states of concentration, just kind of really, really still, but no thinking at all. And then she'd come out and her inner critic was criticizing her all the time. And I said, really, you have to get involved in a conversation. And so even when you're doing concentration practice, there has to be a conversation. And she found that by allowing the inner critic into her concentration, they got along better. Because the inner critic could trust her more. So this inner critic is a useful sense of self. Now, there will come a point where you begin to realize that certain of even your skillful senses of self have to be abandoned, that they're no longer helpful. And of course, the final stage in the path will be when you let go of everything. At that point, nothing is worth holding on to. And in which case, you apply the perception of not self to everything. Now, the question is, these three fetters are cut with the first view of Nibbana, the first view of the deathless. Why is it that not all three fetters are cut, all the 10 fetters are cut? And there's a passage in Anguttara 9:36 which explains this. The Buddha says you get the mind into concentration, you learn to enjoy the concentration, you indulge in the concentration, you get really masterful at getting your mind in concentration. Then you start contemplating it to see its drawbacks. And this falls in line with what the Buddha taught about how to develop discernment. You see how things are originated. You see how things pass away. That's basically establishing the fact that they are fabricated. Then you start asking questions about, well, what's the allure? Why do when I drop these things, why do they keep coming back? What do I like about them? Now, in some cases, it's really easy to see. Once you start asking that question, you say, oh my gosh, why didn't I see that before? As the Buddha said, there are certain defilements, certain desires and passions that go away. All you have to do is look at them with equanimity, and they get kind of embarrassed and they go away. There are others that don't. Those are the ones that where the allure goes deeper. And sometimes it's deeper because you're embarrassed about it. You like certain things, but you don't like to admit to yourself that you like them. And so the allure gets buried. But you're not going to be able to compare the allure with the drawbacks until you dig up the allure. Now, to do this requires that you get the mind into good concentration so that you don't feel threatened by seeing the allure. You look for the allure, and then when you see it, then you can compare it with the drawbacks. And the drawbacks would be it's inconstant, stressful, not self, anything that you can see that would help you see this is not worth the effort that goes into it. And by that point, then you develop dispassion, which is the escape. So you get the mind into concentration. First, you apply this 5-step program to your defilements, and then you start applying it to the path itself. Like for the case with concentration, you see, okay, what's the allure of concentration? It feels really good. It's a nice place to hang out. What's the drawback? Well, it's fabricated. You have to keep on producing it. And the mind gets to the point where it says, can I just have the results without all the work that goes into it? And that's when the mind will then begin to incline toward the deathless. Now, once you hit the deathless, there is the danger that your as I said earlier, your commitment and reflection. Your reflection is not all around. Your first thing is, wow, this is it. This is what the Buddha was talking about. That pulls you out. Because you've developed now a passion for the deathless. And so you have to develop a more all-around ability to reflect. So the next time you have an experience like that, you don't cling to the deathless. You say, okay, there's this, and that's it. And then the Buddha says, this is why he has you to talk about that you apply the perception of anatta, or not self, not only to fabricated things, but to everything. Deathless, fabricated, unfabricated. You have to apply it to everything. And even the perception that all dhammas or all phenomena are not self, that has to get dropped too. You drop everything. That final judgment, that value, and it is a value judgment. As John Mahabharata gives the example of getting into an empty room and saying, wow, this room is really empty. And you realize, wait a minute, I'm standing here, it's not empty. You step outside and go, now it's empty. Okay. So again, we get this emphasis on commitment and reflection, that you commit yourself to the practice, you reflect on what you're doing, where is it stressful, what can you do to stop? And to further, more and more refining this process. It starts with the precepts, it starts with generosity, it starts with all the basic stuff, and it carries all the way through. And the better you are at reflecting in an all-around way, the better the results are going to be. So that's what I wanted to say about the results of stream entry. Have any questions?
John, I was wondering if there's a connection between the ninth jhana and stream entry.
You can experience stream entry based on any of the jhanas. There's a belief in the commentaries that if you hit the ninth jhana, you have to become a non-returner. But the canon doesn't support that.
Thank you.
How long does the experience of stream entry last, dude?
Well, since you're stepping out of space and time,
right?
You can't, and you're not watching the clock as you go in.
I mean, is there like a minimum? I don't know. Like just in terms of like you know what I mean, like absorption or. Like where it's like a saturation point for the mind.
Well, again, it's that point where you say, wow, isn't this cool, and you're out. However long, I mean, since it's outside of space and time, it's hard to say how long that is. But
so you need an outside observer, maybe.
You need an outside
clocking
observer.
You.
And they're not going to be able to tell. Because, they can do MRIs where they can see that you're getting into states of jhana now, apparently. But this is something that's not going to have any effect on your body.
And then why, can you just stay there? I mean, can that just go into
Well, John Cha talks about how I had this experience, which sounds like going in, coming out, 3 times. And in every case, it wasn't that he said, what is this? What is this? What is this? So he kept watching it, which made it deeper and deeper and deeper each time. I mean, sometimes you hear them talking about the nibbanic dip, which sounds like something you would buy down at Whole Foods.
I thought it was a dance move or something.
Just like that Bodhisattva dance they did up at Spirit Rock one time, where you stop and you bow to everybody, you bow to the mountains, you bow to the trees. No, there's no way of timing it.
And then what's the next stage after stream entry?
You just come back and you do the Eightfold Path again. And this time you're going to be aiming at non-return the next time. And in preparation for that, you might want to do body contemplation to overcome your sensual desires and to understand sensual desire. Because the whole point of body contemplation is not just to see the body has some pretty disgusting parts, but you're more interested in seeing why is it that my mind sometimes is willing to look at the disgusting parts and sometimes denies them? What's going on there? Question back there. Over here. Here. Go ahead.
Sorry.
I have a question about the jhana, the first jhana. So I can do the directed thought evaluation, what seems like the single pointedness, but I don't typically have any sense of rapture or this kind of bodily rapture or the happiness.
Well, there should be some pleasure.
Can it be like a relaxed, like
Be
feeling?
very relaxed. The word rapture is probably, it's one of those cases where it's really hard to find a proper English term to translate the Pali term. The Pali term is piti, which is related to drinking. You're sort of drinking in but there's an energy that comes from the body. And sometimes it can be just a sense of fullness, like the cells all feel full. And sometimes it can actually be more rapturous.
Okay, so the sense of relaxation could qualify.
That qualifies ease. The word sukha does not mean happiness in this case, it just means pleasure. The sense of relaxation would be pleasant.
What's the distinction between the rapture and sukha?
Rapture is more energetic. Sukha is the pleasure, and rapture can be unpleasant.
And does sukha follow from rapture?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And the fourth jhana, there is the cessation of breath.
Breathing in and out, yeah.
So does that last for the whole duration of...
As long as you're in that jhana, it can last.
And the fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth, or the preceding jhanas all build from the cessation of breath?
They build from the cessation of breath, yeah.
So you could potentially be in a breathless state for a while?
There's a big question of what's going on, how you can do that. And the best I can figure out is that respiration and breathing are two different things. Respiration is the exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide. And that can happen in the blood vessels. If your pores are wide open and your brain is really, really quiet, you can get enough oxygen through your pores.
Okay, so let's say someone who has a serious meditative ability, they can be in this state for hours?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you.
Question behind you.
You mentioned the state where you could go blank and there is no perception. How does one work out of that state or figure out how not to?
Well, just realize, okay, this may be pleasant right now, but it's going to have bad consequences down the line. The way you get out of it is beforehand you have an anticipation that you will leave at a certain time and you're out.
So one has to make a determination before one does a sit or
it doesn't have to be that solid a determination, just kind of an internal expectation, I'm going to come out at this point.
Okay. Thank you.
Right behind you. Behind you.
Did I hear you say that rapture can be unpleasant?
Mm-hmm.
So I had an experience where I was very focused and it was unpleasant. I felt like I was on a galloping horse without any control, but I was so enticed by the concentrated state that I stayed in it, but I also didn't want to be in it. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. And so the way to deal with that, as I mentioned earlier, is try to figure out, well, is there a more subtle energy in my body right now? Mm-hmm. It's like tuning into a different frequency. And then let kind of the waves of rapture go. You're kind of like you're going under the radar and the waves of rapture go above you, and then after a while they just kind of dissipate. 1. 2, it really feels oppressive if you feel that it's contained in your body and can't get out. In which case you might want to think of it, as I said, going out the palms of your hands, the soles of your feet, going out your eyes. I had a student one time who complained to me, he said, Jeff, I don't think I can do this meditation anymore. Every time I focus on my breath, I get this sense of fullness in my body. And I said, that's what everybody else wants. So I asked her, have you ever nearly drowned? And she said, twice. I said, that's the problem. Because for some people, it's that sense of fullness develops. It feels just like you're drowning. So I told her to imagine that she's not surrounded by water, she's surrounded by air. And it helped.
Thank you.
Arjun, can you hear me? No? Okay. Okay.
Like you're licking an ice cream cone.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, so about the rapture, so my experience started last year with a lot of rapture in the body, and like all the hair of the body, like I could see like some small fan is running the entire body, right? And then I can still, right now, I can feel it, that it's there, it's always there. And the mind has this sound of silence, which like, it goes into it right away. It's just, I don't even have to make an effort. It goes, and then slowly that rapture, the body energy, as you mentioned, that body has a lot of energy. But slowly now it's becoming very cold. It's like cool water or something dropping the entire body, which is very soothing, very, very soothing. And mind just want to be in that state, right? Keep on going. And on my will, it's not, I don't have to make effort. So I just sit and I there. So for me, it's like becoming addictive. So now I'm focusing more on the reading more Dhamma and listening so I can contemplate the Four Noble Truths, seeing the danger in getting attached to that. And I feel like now slowly it's also happening, like this passion is coming. It's very, mind just, it's not like that I'm neglecting any of my job or anything else, but deep inside, I feel like nothing is attractive anymore.
Okay, well, I'd say when you get into a state like that and ask yourself, at what point will I feel that I've had enough of this?
Yeah.
And then ask yourself, in that case, I want something that's even more peaceful, without the rapture, without the coolness, without all these symptoms. And again, it's a matter of tuning into a more refined level of energy. And being attached to jhana is much better than being attached to sensuality.
But this is how the process goes, that you feel disenchanted, and then, because sometimes you just start laughing, oh my God, this is such not worth doing anything. It's just like life, but still I'm doing because I follow the precepts and becoming more compassionate, feeling a lot of suffering for the people who are suffering, or animals, especially animals. Like I'm drawn to animals suffering more than the human suffering. I don't know why is that. Maybe I was an animal before.
Animals seem to be innocent.
Huh?
Animals seem to be innocent.
Yeah, maybe that's why. And the children,
And then you ask yourself, if I really knew the past bad karma, why did this dog become a dog anyhow?
Yeah. It's a very interesting process, and I can see the Dhamma opening, unfolding in front, and then I can see my more or define the subtle defilements, my mindsets right away, or maybe just next minute. It feels like I should put tape on my mouth, because whenever I act on my any kind of aversion, mind catches it. Like in maybe after a minute or so, I have to go and
get faster.
It's like I'm not that. Is a gap still there? I feel like, oh, I should just put the tape on my mouth so I can just get away with not. But I know that's not how it works. I have to go to work. I'm a teacher, and I have to. But it's very nice that I can apply the Dhamma on a daily basis, which is great. So.
Well, I would recommend that as you get the mind into that state, then ask yourself, is there still some stress in this state itself? And what am I doing to contribute to the stress?
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
And then you can get past that.
Yeah, thank you so much.
But also about innocence. Everybody has bad karma.
Yes.
And if you had to confine your compassion only to the innocent, you wouldn't have anybody to have compassion for.
Yeah.
Okay, there's questions over here.
Thank you, Tanajan. The conversation about jhanas brings up a question that comes for me sometimes, the difference between the jhanas and the 7 factors of awakening. Can you talk about that?
Okay, the 7 factors of awakening are one way of looking at jhana practice, and particularly how you get the mind into concentration from mindfulness, using discernment. You start out with the 4 foundations or the 4 establishments of mindfulness, then you go to analysis of qualities. Which the Buddha says is basically analyzing things in terms of skillful and unskillful. There was a famous translator one time who translated this passage in the canon and wrote a footnote. He said, I don't understand this. It should be the 3 characteristics. But the Buddha knew what he's saying, okay? You're looking at what is skillful and what is unskillful in my behavior, because that leads to the 4 Noble Truths. And then from there you see what needs to be abandoned, what needs to be developed. And then there's rapture that comes when skillful qualities are developed, and that gets you into concentration.
Thank you.
Just a second, there's a couple here.
I think that I understood what you said. And maybe I didn't, because the question that's lingering, the beginning of what you said, I heard, the 7 factors of awakening, that is a practice.
That gets the mind from mindfulness into concentration.
And you used the word jhana there also. Mm-hmm. Can you say it again? Okay. So it's a jhana practice, or it's a...
Get yourself into the first jhana at least, and then from there up to the 4th.
So if you're in samadhi, you're in the first jhana?
If you're in right concentration, you're at least in the first jhana.
Okay. And then the others come from that just by...
The others will develop from that. As you see, okay, because the directed thought and evaluation is a process of getting the mind...
Say that again, sorry.
Directed thought and evaluation are a process of getting the mind and the object to fit together.
Check.
Once they fit together, you don't have to keep asking questions.
Right.
Just let them there.
It's there, happening.
Yeah.
And that is that is the next
jhana?
That's the
next step. That's the next jhana. And then from there, it's just a practice of staying just really, really still. Mm-hmm. The rapture comes and starts getting unpleasant.
Yeah, totally unpleasant. Then it passes away, and then you're just resting.
And then things become a lot quieter.
Yeah.
And then finally, your breath, in and out breathing stops.
Yes. Thank you for that articulation. I'm familiar with those experiences, but hadn't not really studied the map at all. Mm-hmm. And so those are different jhanas. Mm-hmm. Can you map them to the jhana words for me?
Jhana words.
First jhana, second jhana, like those things you just described have terms or titles.
First jhana is one that has the directed thought and evaluation. Second jhana, you've dropped the directed thought and evaluation, but there is pleasure and rapture. The rapture starts getting unpleasant, so you drop that and you get into the 3rd jhana.
There's your sukha.
Which is just pleasure, and the mind feels equanimous, but the body feels mind feels equanimous, the body feels pleasant. And then finally you feel like even in and out breathing gets laborious. So you stop. Mm-hmm. And there you are.
You stop and?
4th jhana.
Okay.
There you go.
So a very brief moment of the absence of breathing is kind of a taste of the 4th jhana?
Yeah, if it's unforced.
Unforced.
Yeah, it just happens to be that
just
way.
happens.
Now some people in there, I'm not breathing.
Yeah.
But you say, as long as I don't need to breathe, I don't have to breathe. And if I do need to breathe, the body will breathe.
And all along the way, one way to be practicing with that is just observing it.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
This is commitment and reflection.
Ai Bante.
Okay, one question back
thank you
here,
very
and then
much.
we'll go to Zoom land.
Hi, John. Hi, Ajahn. So if there's the five senses are pretty much shut off, but there's a little bit of sound consciousness, could it still be jhana, or do they have to be 100% shut off?
No, they're not. Don't have to be shut off at all.
Oh.
The only time the Buddhist talks about them being shut off would be when you go into the formless jhanas, and even that's not necessary. There's what he calls pure and impure formless jhanas.
Okay. Is it necessary for to see the light nimitta for it to be jhana?
No.
Oh. Okay. Cool. Thanks.
Can we zoom in first and then come back? Okay.
Tanaja, just a follow-up question on that one. And as you describe about the path for the four jhanas, and then also, the question about is there a stress in the mind, right? Is that this question has always been asked along the way? Just what's
Yeah, you drop the different factors of one jhana to go into the next jhana because it's stressful. You don't do a checklist. It's okay. Now I've had enough directed thought evaluation. Thank you. Check. It's just they don't seem necessary, and they feel stressful at that point.
Okay.
And they may be stressful to begin with, but they're a necessary thing to get the mind to settle down. To get the mind to fit the object and the object to fit the mind. And then when it's no longer necessary, John Fuang's analogy is that you have a water buffalo, and you want the water buffalo to come, so you call its name. And then when it's there, you don't have to call its name anymore. Somebody got it. And then as I said, the rapture starts feeling stressful, so you drop that.
Okay.
And then the breathing starts feeling stressful.
That's what I mean by stressful in the mind. Right. Okay. Thank you.
Can you hear me? Mm-hmm. Does one thoroughly understand the 12 links in dependent co-origination when one becomes a stream enterer? If not, at what point does one fully understand and go beyond the 12 links?
Well, you fully understand and go beyond them when you become an arahant. Basically, if you stream enter, you've understood one of the links very thoroughly. And that's enough to make the whole process unzip.
When you say fully understand that one link, does that mean you understand how that goes forward and how you can break that link?
Basically, yes. How you say how fabrication is connected with consciousness, or how craving is connected to clinging, someplace along there. Do nylon stockings still run? Nylon stockings, do they still run? They do, yeah. Okay. I've been away from them for a long time. But I remember my mother always complaining about her stockings running. But it's the same sort of thing. You get one of the links unhooks, and then there's a run.
Can you speak about the difference and similarity between the 4 types of clinging and the fetters that fall away at stream entry? Is the grasping of habits and practices falls away at stream entry analogous to clinging to habits and practices?
Okay, there is a connection, but the fetter is more subtle.
And what about the self-identity view versus clinging to sense of self? I mean, both of these are related to the same question.
Self-identity view is one way of clinging to sense of self. The other way of clinging, of course, is conceit, which does not let go of until arahantship. And of course, sensuality clinging is related to the fetter for sensuality, which is only let go at non-return.
Is stream entry the true happiness you refer to? I don't know what it's very happy.
We can imagine a happiness that is not affected by time.
There's some question about the distinction between. I think the way they seem to be framing it is a little confusing. So they asked me to rephrase it, so I'm going to take some liberty in that. And it says disenchantment and finding things unattractive. So I'm assuming that their question is related to the distinction between dispassion and disenchantment.
Okay, disenchantment is a term that actually is related to the feeding analogy. Remember, you're clinging to something, and it's the same as feeding off of it. Disenchantment, the word nibbida, means basically you've had enough of that kind of food. And you just, it might have been something you liked before, but you realize, I don't want this anymore. And the disenchantment is actually aimed at particular objects. From disenchantment, you go to dispassion. Dispassion is your passion to keep on creating those fabrications. What's interesting in the passages where they talk about progressing from disenchantment to dispassion, dispassion to release, disenchantment has either the 5 aggregates as its objects or the 6 sense spheres. Dispassion has to be all around.
When you attain stream entry, are you sure that you have attained stream entry? And do you know that you have attained stream entry? This is kind of the question that's being asked.
It's, yeah, but it's the knowledge is something that you really know, but you say, just to be on the safe side, I better be, keep on practicing.
Okay, so you're not sure that you have.
You're sure, but it's funny. But you've been sure about things in the past, right? But this is something that bang hits you really hard.
There's this question on why is there disagreement about sensory deprivation in the jhanas,
because the mind can get into different states where it either has or does not have any sense. There are lots of different states of concentration. But the Buddha is very specific in the canon that there will be lack of any outside stimuli coming in, only in the formless realms, formless dimensions. It's not a prerequisite for the 4 jhanas. Now the commentary says that you don't sense things outside, but the commentary's description of jhana and the canon's description of jhana are 2 very different things.
Does stream entry feel like meditating while body is sleeping? I think you answered this, but
you have no sense of the body at all.
You have no sense of the body at all. But we see the body is sleeping, but your consciousness is awake. You cannot move your body, but you are conscious about it.
You have no sense of the body at all. That's one of the 6 senses. And it's part of name and form. All those things are gone.
Okay. Other questions seem to be unrelated. Thank you.
Okay. Alex.
Is it on? So a lot of the Thai ajahns, they talk about utilizing body contemplation a lot in order to, from my understanding, in order to realize stream entry or something of the sort. Could you talk about how, what role that plays here and how to approach that?
Okay, there are lots of different ways of doing body contemplation. And the most important ones are the ones that get you more reflecting on not just how ugly the body is, but also what is it in the mind that wants to find it attractive. Again, you start reflecting. And it's the ability to reflect and say, that it is an issue of perception. And if I could just drop those perceptions, then I'd be better off. That's one way of getting the mind to sort of stop fabricating on a certain level. But John Lee, apparently, when you read his autobiography, the point where it sounds like he had stream entry, he was contemplating the breath. So it varies from person to person. With John Mahabua, he's contemplating pain. But it's the same sort of thing. You start reflecting back on the mind's use of perceptions in this process.
So it all kind of comes down to seeing how you're putting it all together.
Right.
In a way. Okay. Thank you. Action.
Right behind you.
Thanajan, you mentioned about Ajahn Mahabua, about contemplating on pain. And if your body doesn't have pain, what kind of pain do you contemplating on?
Sit longer.
Okay.
Sit longer. Well, you were the one who asked.
And my second question, I know it's not so important because it's still a long way for me, but in the book, that the path to Arahant about Ajahn Mahabua, and it talked about him, getting into stream entry and just going forward. Only when he looked back, he realized that that was a milestone, that was a stream entry. So when he got there, he knew that it was something huge, but then he just kept going. So would that be a situation, even though, like in his situation, he got to stream entry, but that he didn't recognize that was a stream entry?
Yep.
Okay. So it's just that,
And, this is something really big, but you want to be, humble enough to say, well, maybe it's, I've got to watch this.
Thank you.
Question back here.
ท่านอาจารย์คะคือจะถามเป็นภาษาไทยหรือภาษาอังกฤษ
Go ahead.
They're talking about jhana, right? And then then you're talking about okay. You're talking about a lot of people asking about jhana and then how many jhana you have to go through. Do we have to always get into the rapture part?
Well, again, sometimes rapture comes and you hardly notice it.
Oh, okay.
It's just a sense of fullness.
The what? Okay.
There's a sense of fullness in the body. It's not overwhelming. Other people, it really knocks them out.
Okay. Because I've never experienced that, and that's why I wonder, do I have
Just have a sense of fullness, like every cell in your body feels full and satisfied.
Okay.
And also with different people, with one person, sometimes it will be more intense and sometimes than others.
I see.
And the best I can think of is if it's like you come out of the desert, you haven't drunk any water for a while. You have that first taste of water and every cell in your body goes, yay.
I see.
And then after several days, you've been drinking water every day and you have another glass of water.
Okay. Got it.
There's a question over here.
It's kind of a question, but I think of all the stream entering as like the ultimate cling. It's like, I want this, and there's all this desire for this thing that, I don't know. I think it can come. But the other maybe side comment is what's the problem with coming back to life? There's so much work to be done.
There's work to be done, but just think about your poor mother having to bury you again for 9 months.
I've gone through it. I would have done it again in a heartbeat, and I had some really rough pregnancies. And the moment my son was born, I would have done it again in a heartbeat. And if not for modern medicine, we both probably would have died. And it's not that bad. It is. It's awful. And
let me ask a few other women, okay?
When you're done.
My question is about the word chitta, or heart-mind, and how does that relate to the self, the aggregates, karma, rebirth, and
Okay, the Buddha never defines citta. I mean, it functions as heart in some cases, in some contexts. It functions as mind in other contexts. In fact, that's one of the distinctive features in a lot of Buddhist cultures, is that the word for heart and mind is basically the same word. So we're talking about the entire psyche. And the way it's used in the canon it's used inconsistently. Sometimes the Buddha talks about the mind just arising and passing away, rising and passing away. Sometimes it sounds more like the mind is what is, or the citta is what is released with final awakening.
And when you're reborn, does the chitta follow you? Or, I mean, I'm trying to map this onto a Christian upbringing, which is like the soul. But I understand this may not map.
Try to throw the map out.
Okay.
And just
hard to do.
When I was at the monastery, as I said, we had a Catholic priest for a couple of weeks with us. He was kind of on what do you call it? He was on leave. He didn't have to wear his collar and everything. We had some visitors from Australia when they were sitting at the picnic table having their meal. So I asked them before they left, what would you like to hear me give a talk about? He said, I'd like to hear you talk about your relationship to Christianity nowadays. I said, please don't. I had it thoroughly drummed out of me.
Okay.
So it's basically what goes is your clinging and craving goes. And the being that you've created out of that clinging and craving, that goes from one life to the next. So it's a process, it's not a thing. And so basically the question is, do I want to continue this process? Now some people think it's fine, they want to do it again. And we're not going to stop them. Until they've decided, I think I've had enough. And you say, okay, and then but the thing about looking at it from this point of view is, it's something you can do something about. And if you have this citta that's forced on you, or you have this soul that's forced on you, you don't know what to do with it. It's a thing. Whereas you're thinking more about a process. And a process is something you can watch and you can observe and you decide, do I want to continue this process or do I want to stop this process? And if so, how do I do that? And those are the questions. Those are the questions that are useful. What did Mike do?
I have a question on intention and what role it plays in stream entry. Like intention already has renunciation, non-ill will, and no harm in it.
That kind of intention is what motivates you to follow the path. But at the moment of stream entry, all intentions are dropped. Even the intention to drop your intentions is dropped.
No, I am talking about going for stream entry, the process.
Okay, the Buddha says basically it's a good desire to have, but don't focus so much on stream entry, focus on the path. So if you get the path right, then that'll take care of it. It's like, the mountain, like the road going to the Grand Canyon. The road going to the Grand Canyon doesn't cause the Grand Canyon, but it takes you there. And just sitting on the road and thinking Grand Canyon, Grand Canyon, Grand Canyon, that's not going to take you there either. But say, I really want to go to the Grand Canyon.
But if it comes from a place of strong resolve, like aditana.
Right. Yeah, if you want to go to the Grand Canyon, even though it's really hot outside, whatever it is, I'm going to
No,
get
not
there.
focusing on the goal, but as a motivation.
Exactly. You're focusing on your motivation. This is where I want to go. This is what I've got to do. I'm going to do it.
The motivation is to go beyond self-view and
Well, make your motivation.
doubt.
I want to stop causing suffering.
Yeah.
Could you talk a little bit more about the 3 types of fabrication which you alluded to earlier, and how can we use it to, this way of looking at things to cause ourselves less sufferings?
Okay, when you think about your different aggregates, your feelings, your perceptions, your feelings, the raw material for these things is coming in from the past. And how you fix that raw material is going to make the difference in whether you suffer from it or don't suffer from it. You can make the analogy with being a cook. You go into the kitchen, you open the refrigerator. Some days there's good food, some days there's bad food. But if you're a skilled cook, you can make good food out of anything. If you're a bad cook, you can ruin anything. And so what's coming up every day from your old karma, that would be like the food in the refrigerator. And then you've got the way you breathe, which is bodily fabrication. The way you talk to yourself, which topics you choose to talk about and how you talk about them. That's verbal fabrication. And then perceptions, which are the images you hold in mind about what's going on. And then the feelings of pleasure or pain that you focus on. All of those go together to create your experience of the present moment out of the raw material that's coming to you. So you can choose. You have potentials that right now in your body. There are potentials for pain in some parts, potentials for pleasure in other parts. you have the choice of what you're going to focus on. And if you, in part of the meditation, the training all here is to get you more skills as a cook. There's a great scene in Asterix. Do you know the cartoon Asterix? Yeah. There's a scene where Asterix they're having some celebration in the little village in Gaul. And all these people that have been on his previous adventures are coming to join in the celebration, and they're bringing their wives. So there's one scene where the wives are sitting together and they're talking about cooking. And the woman from France is saying that, I really like lots of different herbs and butter in my food. And the woman from Spain is saying, well, I really prefer olive oil. And the woman from England says, I don't know, I think boiling gives things a really good taste. The way they treat the British in that cartoon is brutal. So yeah, suppose you've always been boiling something, and then your John comes along and says, no, you can actually cook in olive oil, you can cook in butter, you can cook in all these other things. That you're extending your range as a cook.
Thank you.
This question over here. Good.
Dear John, can you please elaborate on the word deathless? And also I'm curious to know what is the Pali term for it.
The Pali term is amata. Amata. A-M-A-T-A. And it's deathless because it's outside of time. So there's no change. No possibility for change. It's called the unborn and the undying.
Just a practical question about not being a monk and having friends, and I just have this, having conversations with friends and who are kind of on the path, their own path or what have you. But there's this talk about, living the human experience and about kind of having experience, and because I'm here as a human, and I don't know, there's this kind of culture around that as not, this idea of not coming back is not appealing to my friends. They want to be, they're very interested in living it up, right? And so I just sometimes have a hard time. I can relate to that, and I also question that, right? Just to be how do I stay friends with you and not kind of, undermine my own practice or my own aspirations.
Yeah, you've got to be careful about the depth of your friendships with people like that. I mean, if they've been friends with you in the past, and you don't want to be, unkind to them. But then also a question of how much time do you want to spend with them? How much do you want to talk to them about things that really mean a lot to you? And what is inhuman about practicing the Dharma? That's part of the human experience too. There's that story about Richard Feynman. He learned how to play the bongos. And someone wrote a letter to him saying, just really makes you a human being that I know that you play the bongos. And Richard Feynman was furious. He said, isn't doing physics part of being a human? Isn't Dharma practice part of being a human? I mean, dogs can go for sensual pleasures, If they knew how to make alcohol, they'd do it, I said, if dogs knew how to make alcohol, they'd do it,
So there's this idea, I get what you're saying, and it's almost like I feel like I'm depriving myself of experience, because with this sort of renunciation, and then I don't know how to be with, maybe it's about choosing different friends or something, or how do I stay in friendship and not compromise my...
Again, it's the depth of the friendship you might want to question. And ask yourself, if these people are pulling me back, are they really friends? I mean, if they've been loyal to you in the past, you don't want to abandon them, but at the same time, you don't want to. I mean, had food before, you've had drink before, you've had all these other things before. You know what it's like, right? So you say, okay, I've seen that. What I haven't seen is what the mind in jhana is like. I haven't seen what the mind can do when it is in jhana. This is something I'd like to explore. So instead of cutting yourself off, you're actually opening up some new avenues that would be closed off otherwise.
Yeah, and this whole conversation is interesting just to know that there are other altered states of higher levels of consciousness, and they're accessible. Thank you.
Yeah. Is there a mic nearby?
I wasn't planning on asking this question, but there's been so many comments about jhana that I guess my actual question is how to go deeper and be able to access it more easily. The first time I had it was I still remember very vividly in 89 at 88 at 98 at Spirit Rock Gill's New Year's retreat, and I was just getting frustrated. My mind was all over the place, so I began focusing on breathing, and actually a mantra kind of came into mind. So I used that to narrow and heal my mind, and I just moved in ultimately to the first jhana. But it was very sublime. It was very, and I was sitting cross-legged on the floor, and I remember thinking, I can sit like this forever. I'll never need to move. It was just very serene. And so kind of speaking to what other people have said, it's like it's a motivator, and it gave me a clear sense at a certain point, I'm not this body. I had a sense of me being an energy ball or something over here. And I guess it kind of changed my, I don't want to say changed my life, it changed my perception of myself and the world. And so I was able to go into the maybe up to 4, because I remember noticing, I didn't know anything about it, but I knew this is not unique. It's unique for me. I've never had this. I've never heard about it. It's so profound. And wondering what the heck is going on. But I just went with it. And so as people are talking, I remember, oh yeah, I had that. But it was so long ago, and I've had beginning entrance movement in that direction since then, but it has to be a long retreat. It wouldn't happen, just coming here on a Sunday morning or something. So, but it seemed to stop at about 4 when, my breath had stopped, and I didn't realize some of these things until it stopped. Like at a certain point, maybe in the early, in 1 or so, I must have been smiling or something, because when I slipped into the next phase, I felt the smile go away. It's like, wow, what? That's weird. And I just remember thinking, wondering what's going on, and how to use it most effectively. And I still don't know what that is. I think you gave me a book a long time ago, maybe that you had translated from one of your teachers that kind of talks about the jhanas. But it was, so I guess my question is how to get the most benefit from it, because I got some of the benefits from those first 4, but I think other people like Cheryl and some of our other Sangha members have really been able to go very, very deep into it, and pretty easily, I guess. So the question is how to be able to go into this or go further with it, I guess.
Okay, well, turn off your computer. Turn off as many of your social media things as possible. And just remind yourself, okay, I really want to get to know my breath. Because getting into jhana, you don't take jhana as your object, you take the breath as your object. So I really want to get to know my breath really well. And just make that your daily preoccupation. And when you have time to be quiet by yourself, okay, take the time to be quiet by yourself. When you're engaged in other activities, say, how can I stay in touch with my breath while I'm doing that? So that basically keep your mind on a short leash.
I think that's what I realized, is that I can't have a whole bunch of craziness going on and think that I can quiet my mind like that. I felt like on those long retreats that it's like I'm slowing a Big Mac truck down with no brakes. And ultimately I did, but just because of the length of time.
Yeah. So you want to be more efficient in saying, I've got to cut out as many of these distractions as I can. There's something called sense restraint.
Yeah.
And you want to practice that as much as you can. Which doesn't mean you just don't look or don't listen. It means that if you are looking and you are listening, you ask yourself, why? And what's the impact this is having on my mind? And if it's having a bad impact, why am I looking that way? Listening that way?
So I realized in just those first few stages that it changed my perception of, I don't know, philosophy of myself and the world. And I'm wondering, as an incentive, what comes from the higher ones? Is there any?
Okay, well, tell you so. I really want to get to know my breath, and that'll take me there.
Whatever it is.
Whatever it is, yeah.
Okay, we can talk about it some more. I don't want to hog all the time. Thank you.
Okay, one more here.
Yeah, Ajahn, this is a basic question about practice. Like, so for me in my meditation sit, like I have some level of absorption, and my breath is very different from the regular breath, and it sometimes reveals as like spinning or something, and it sometimes shows in different parts of the body, but the nada sound is more prominent. But something that I notice is that there's a low level of thoughts. Like if you ask me what I'm thinking, I won't be able to tell you, but I know there's some thoughts going on. So I feel like maybe I'm not using enough energy. Do you have any suggestions for me?
Yeah, the nada sound is good for stilling the mind, but really not that good for getting any insight. Whereas working with the breath gives you more sense of, okay, how do my intentions shape my experience of the breath? How do my perceptions shape my experience of the breath? And ask yourself, okay, which perceptions do I find most useful for getting the mind to settle down? And then as the mind gets more quiet, then those sort of background voices in their mind will become clearer, which is what you want to see. You want to say, well, what are they talking about back there? And you find that there are actually these little sort of conversations going on. So, as I said, try to use the breath, or use the breath as your way of gaining some understanding about perception and the role that perception plays in shaping your experience.
Can you clarify what do you mean by perception?
Okay. Perception is the image you hold in mind about the breath, or your body, or your mind in relationship to the breath and the body.
I'm trying the method too, and that is really being really helpful for me than all the other traditional ways of looking at the breath. So.
And there's some other perceptions you can try. John Lee himself talks about the breath coming up from the soles of the feet, or coming from the navel up to the nose. One perception I found useful is thinking of every cell in your body breathing in, breathing out all together, and you give everybody equal attention.
Yeah, that could be really helpful, because for me, body sensations are very prominent and easy to work with. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, zoom that.
Thanks, John. Can you regress from stream entry, or does it imply that you have overcome any further internal or external obstacles? Can you rely on the evaluations about your stream entry status by your teachers and colleagues?
Depends on who your teachers and colleagues are. But I mean, if it's genuine, you're not going to regress. It's going to make a permanent change.
Would you need to?
I was talking to a Zen priest one time. He said, nothing is permanent. And I told him, if they cut off your arm, they'll never be able to connect it the way it was.
Tanajan, would you need to ask someone for confirmation if you have attained stream entry?
It depends on your personality. Some people have to have everything confirmed.
Okay. How long can someone be in the state of stream entry? Can the body?
We had that question already.
Okay. Can the body survive without breathing for so long?
Yeah.
Okay. Is it possible to be lost in that state and not be able to return back?
No. It's the opposite of lost. A Vipassana teacher once asked me, what do you have to do with people who gain stream entry and find it disorienting? I said, it's not stream entry. Stream entry is very orienting.
Can a person, because of lifetime, because of past lifetimes karma, be ineligible for stream entry?
Not from past lifetimes, no.
Or even just present lifetimes karma?
If you kill your parents, you're ineligible.
But in future lifetimes you can potentially?
You have the possibility.
If you attained stream entry in this lifetime, how do you continue on after rebirth? Are you aware that you are a stream enterer?
When you come out of the mother's womb, you're concerned about other things at that point. Any last questions here? Oh my gosh, okay. Let's get people who haven't had it.
Yeah. Earlier, you mentioned the Buddha talking to the stream enterers about heedlessness. So I wondered if you could elaborate on that and what are the traps that people fall into after?
Well, basically the trap is, now that I'm not going to be born below a human level, and I'm going to have only 7 more lifetimes, I don't have to try so hard. That's the trap. And then you tell people like that, you could be reborn in Gaza. So even the human realm is not all that safe. But the thing is, they will be reborn in a place where they get to practice the Dharma.
I'm wondering what the, skillful attitude is underlying experimenting with different perceptions of the breath. So to use an example you gave earlier, that the breath is coming from the feet up or is coming into every cell, that those are, in a sense, different fabrications. There are any number. So in a way, it's one sort of deciding or choosing how to view reality. In a way that seems unnatural to me, insofar as it's creating a fabrication.
Okay, well, the way you're already looking at reality is one fabrication. Yeah. And one way of testing it is this the best way of looking at it? Can I imagine other ways of looking at it that would be equally true, but would actually give a better result? And the example I always think about is, the world is round. Have you ever seen the world round? Now you do know that if you fly from San Francisco to Paris, you fly over Canada, you fly over Greenland, and that's the short route, which makes sense only if the world is round. So even though it looks flat, you have to hold the perception, hey, it's round.
So look at it as a way of testing
your perception.
Different perceptions, and yeah, that makes sense. Thanks.
Okay, well, thank you for your attention.